Hi everyone, IHN here, and this is going to be a video walkthrough of the Cipher Matchmaker puzzle I made for POS for the Puzzlers Club 2019 edition of Secret Solver. Okay, that's a bit of an intro, so what is a Cipher Matchmaker puzzle? A cipher matchmaker puzzle is a combination of two common variants. A cipher puzzle is where all of the numbers or other symbols in a grid are ciphered into another form, and part of solving is to determine what each of those symbols stand for. In any given puzzle, the same symbol will stand for the same uh, clue. So if we look at puzzle A here, if we set p equal to 17, for instance, then all values of p in that grid are 17. Now for this one, I bounded all of the givens to be between 2 and 6 and set that as explicitly part of the rules so that there can be some fun interactions between grids. Because this is also a matchmaker puzzle, which is a puzzle type where you're given a list of grids and a list of genres, and part of solving is to figure out and match which puzzle type goes to which grid. Additionally, since I combined these, in each grid, each letter stands for a different number, and each letter stands for a different number in each grid. This is so that, again, so that I can have some interplay between grids. So again, if P was equal to 17 in puzzle A, then no other grid could have a value of P being 17. It would have to be a different number. So what are the 5 types? I picked cave, which I'll give a quick explanation of each of the rules for these as I go. So a cave puzzle requires you to figure out which cells are part of the cave. And these cells are unshaded, and they must all be connected. Further, all shaded cells must be connected to the outside of the grid. So if we were to shade this cell here and all 3 of these were unshaded, then it would have to find a path to the outside of the grid by whatever means necessary. Otherwise, it would be isolated and the puzzle would not be solved. This is a bit of a weird requirement, but it stems from the fact that Cave was originally a looping puzzle, and this was just a consequence of the rules. So I'm going to cover Corrado and Task Square at the same time because they're fairly similar types. I picked them because they're fairly similar types. Corrado, each number gives you the value of the total of clumps of nearby cells. So using this W, for instance, this W would be 4, and this H would be 3. There is no connectivity requirement in a Corrado puzzle. However, if we look at puzzle C, when we put in a task square puzzle, things are a little different. All of these clumps of cells must be squares. And that's pretty much the only other change. So this A has a value of 5. And this S would have a value of 1. However, there's also a requirement that all unshaded cells are connected. So you cannot have any section of the grid that is blocked off entirely by shaded cells. So if this was in the grid for whatever reason, say A is 2, P is 3, W is 4, then at this point, this section would be isolated and it would not be a valid solution because of that. Similarly, Nurikabe and Tapa have some fairly similar rules. In a Nurikabe puzzle, you care about all the shaded cells being connected, and this goes for Tapa as well. There cannot be any 2x2 square of shaded cells. So in any 2x2 square, there's at least one unshaded cell. And for Nurikabe, each number is the size of the region that it's in of unshaded cells, which in this case, H would be equal to 2. And over here for Tapa, each number is the value of essentially a run of cells that's next to it. So this P would have a value of 4 right now. And it's important to note for Tapa that what I just did to that P would not make it a 6 clue, but instead make it a 2-4 clue, because Tapa clues can have multiple numbers. For the purposes of this cipher, there are no multi-numbered clues, which helps out with the solve for the Tapa in a lot of interesting ways. So with all of the rules out of the way, how do you even solve this? How do you get started? So for any matchmaker puzzle, the first thing you want to do is try to pin down which grids are the most constrained and which rule sets are the most constrained. And at least for me, I think puzzle C is a natural place to begin. It cannot be Narakabe because there are adjacent clues, so that's a freebie. It cannot be Tapa because of this A clue. If this A clue right here is any value higher than 2, it cannot be satisfied. If it is 2, there are two possibilities, both of which will force this A to have these three cells unshaded. And so these two would break connectivity, and these two would also break connectivity given this A. So as a result of that, puzzle C cannot be our Tapa puzzle. Okay, but can puzzle C be our task square puzzle? And the answer to that is also no, for the same reason. If A is in task square, it must be 2. This is the only value that this A can hold, which means that then this A can never be 2. So very simple counterfactual. And just like that, puzzle C has been narrowed down to cave and Corrado. So it's not easy to rule out Corrado from any of these, but we should be able to rule out cave, right? With all of the clues being adjacent, whichever number it would be at 2 would be immediately satisfied. And if we look at A and W, let's just look at the A specifically because we've been looking at that. If A is 2, then this A is seeing all it needs to see, this A is seeing all it needs to see, and we've broken connectivity. So A and W both can't be 2 in this puzzle. Moving on, if we set P equal to 2, and I'm not going to shade all the cells for this because that would take a while, then we would know that this is shaded, and this is shaded. So this cell must escape, and then this P, which we already know has a value of 2, now has a value greater than 2. So P cannot be 2. Similarly, if we try and look at H equals 2, we can actually get a little farther. It's a little harder to see this one in your head, but it's entirely possible. We now know that if H equals 2, all of these cells are shaded. P must escape, P equals 4, because this P sees 4, S sees 6, and as soon as it sees 6, it runs into this H and sees 7. So as a result of that, if puzzle C is our cave puzzle, then we've now proven that S must be our 2. And this one is the hardest one to see of all, but I do guarantee that it is broken. It would be broken. And if you can see why in your head, then good job. This is one of the steps that really helps to just try out. So if S equals 2, then again, we're only going to care about the center. This P must escape down here. P now has a value of 4. Because of this, if it links here, H would also have a value of 4. And again, we have the exact same setup as before, where this gives a value of 4. So this H is now 6. It comes down here, and it touches the A, and as soon as it touches the A, it has a value of 7. And as a result of that, we know that puzzle C is not cave. So because of that, we know that puzzle C must be our Corrado puzzle. And that's a big deal because it means that we don't have to worry about any of the rest of these grids potentially being Corrado, which would be very hard to disprove. So let's take a look at puzzle E, because puzzle E has a section that draws my attention here. And that section that draws my attention is this bottom right corner with these S's, specifically this cell. If it is Narakabe, then S equals 1, which is prohibited via the rules. If it is task square, then it must be 2 because there's no room for a 2 by 2 square, which would, as I'm sure you can see for the same reason, force this cell to be unconnected, and so it's not task square. Can this S be part of a Tapa clue? Well, since this section is symmetric on the diagonal, we can just pick a side. And if S equals 3, let's put that in. Well, we know how the rest of these 3's go, and the puzzle is not connected. However, we cannot make a similar statement about S equals 2, as it is possible that it escapes out into the grid like this. And we can't quite make any claims about that. We can't make any claims about what W and A are. They don't constrain enough other than forcing the P and H to both be very large clues. And in fact, we can say that this P cannot be a very large clue. So we would force H to be a very large clue. And actually, dang, that circumvents something I was hoping that would be required. Oh well. So this is the first time I've actually noticed this, but A and W both cannot be 6. P cannot be 6 due to here, and H cannot be 6 because if it is, this S breaks. So puzzle E actually can't be Tapa at all. The intended solution here, before I just noticed that for the first time, sorry, let me undo the placements first, was that you would have to use a crossover between placing puzzle, or that terribly sorry about that. You would have to place S equals 2 in another puzzle grid, and after you've done so, you would be able to show that puzzle E could not be the Tapa and instead must be the cave. So again, cave is one of the hard ones to disprove, and that's not super valuable yet, but it is still valuable to know that cave has been placed. But again, you can get to this point without that deduction. Moving on, if we look at puzzle B, because it seems to be highly constrained, specifically through the lens of can it be Nurikabe, this S and this W both must be 2, because they can both only extend in this direction, and then they can go no farther. So we now know that puzzle B is either Tapa or task square. That's interesting. If we look at puzzle A, then the big proof on puzzle A is that if it is our Tapa puzzle, or actually, let's look at B first for Tapa. Can B be Tapa? W and S make up both of our small values, and it doesn't seem like you can really go anywhere else from there. There's a way out if W is 3, which W would then have to be 3, but you can't really prove anything else about this. If you look at puzzle A, if you specifically look at the corners of puzzle A and think about the rules of task square, then you'll notice that the only value that it can be in a corner cell like this P or this H is 4, or any other square number. But within the range 2 to 6, it can only be 4. And since we have 2 such numbers, both P and H would have to be 4, and so puzzle A is not our task square puzzle. That's nice to know. But the next real question would be, where's the Nurikabe? Can puzzle A be Nurikabe? And the answer to that question is no. There's a lot of reasons why it can't. You might try and go for one of the intuitive ones, but I think that the easiest one to explain and demonstrate, and most important one here, is that if you look at this P, the largest it can be without breaking connectivity is 5 cells. If you look at this S, the largest it can be without breaking connectivity is 4 cells. Same for this H. If you look at this A can be of size 6, and so can this A, but this A is of size 6, then it extends down here, and then this A now caps at size 5. And so if we look at the W is a little harder to see, but W cannot reach size 6 if this cell is shaded, right? I'll leave that as an exercise to the viewer, but rest assured that if it's unshaded, then you have to draw shaded cells around here that you need to make this one be 6. You have to unshade all of those, then you can pick one of these two, and then whichever one you pick, you get a shaded cell here. Either this shaded cell escaping, or this cell needing to be shaded due to direct connectivity, and it has to come out, down, and around, and either way, this S is isolated. So now that we've proven that puzzle A cannot be the Nurikabe puzzle, we now know that puzzle D is our Nurikabe puzzle. And this would be true regardless of if we had shown that puzzle E could not be Tapa yet. So with puzzle D being our Nurikabe puzzle, there's not too much we can do here. Or at least not just yet. So now, between Tapa and task square, we also have determined that puzzle A cannot be the task square. So puzzle B is our task square and puzzle A is our Tapa. And you could get to this point other than still having Tapa and Cave undetermined, just by trying to chase down where Nurikabe lies. So the important thing here now is to look at puzzle B in particular. As soon as you figure out that this must be task square, by placing Nurikabe to rule it out, task square from puzzle D, as soon as you've done that, we know that W in puzzle B equals 4. Because as we said when we were analyzing puzzle A, that's the only value that can be in a corner. And you'll notice that very quickly, just from normal task square logic, P is 5 and H is 6. And that gives you a lot of information about the rest of the grid very quickly. So I'm just going to fill in a lot of this as I go. I think this is as far as I can really take that at the moment. So P is 5 and H is 6. So that means that between A and S, we still have 2 and 3 to place. But if we look at this S, if it's 3, we've broken connectivity, so it must be 2. And this is that S equals 2 step I was talking about earlier. Because the moment you would place S equals 2 is the moment that you rule out Tapa from the bottom of puzzle E. And at this point, you would know that puzzle A must be the Tapa. So you don't shortcut much with that deduction, but it is a really cool step that I wanted to highlight here. And I'm a little disappointed that it's not actually required. So let's just fill out the rest of this grid. It's pretty much just chasing down the last places that you can put shaded cells and unshaded connectivity, like all the way down. This section must be unshaded, and that gives you this 4, which resolves the rest of the task square puzzle. So the next puzzle that is good to make progress in is Tapa, because you have this P, S, and H combo on the left side. And as a result of the P, S, and H combo on the left side, we can state that P and H must be S in some order, or must be 2 and 3 in some order. So S must be 4 or 5. Regardless of whether it's 4 or 5, these 3 cells must be shaded around this P, which gives you that P is 4, S equals 2. This cell must be unshaded because it would have to continue here. W then equals 5, and A is 6. And that is the entirety of the Tapa cipher. A cipher Tapa is a really cool puzzle type. I want to see more of those. So let's just put in the rest of these numbers down here. And you'll notice that S now has 2 small numbers placed. And we'll get back to that in a moment, but let's just solve the rest of this Tapa. Again, through some fairly normal means. We know H equals 2, so we have to go here. That one has to be unshaded due to this S that we hadn't marked yet. W is 5, so this resolves the S up here. And then there's this one step, because now that we know that A equals 6 and P equals 3, these 2 cells, this P and this A, interact with each other. No matter what you do, taking 6 cells will take a cell from these 3. And no matter which of these cells you choose, if any, you will never be able to link this cell that I've just marked as unshaded to over here. It would take at least 4 cells, and we don't have 4. So that marks this cell as unshaded. That gives us this 2, and resolves the other H as well. We can now make a similar deduction with this 6, and just generally get a large part of the remainder of the puzzle, because P equals 3. This W being 5, we know that we can never reach here, which gives us this 4 being resolved. And then finally, this S is 4, which kind of pencils off this section and solves the remainder of the tapa. Okay, so now let's take a look at puzzle D, the Nurikabe puzzle. And specifically, as I said, S has two small numbers taken. This is by design, because if we look at this S, the smallest value it can be is 2, and the largest value it can be is 4. And as a result of that being 4, well, that only leaves one value available for it, and that is a 3. If we then try to consider this Nurikabe, specifically this cell, it can never be unshaded because it takes 2 cells from the S. Likewise, this cell can never be unshaded because it takes 2 cells from the S. And then we've now created this place where if we look at the intersection of Nurikabe and H, it can only be 4 or 5. And regardless of which we take, 4 cells here, a 5th cell here. And if we try to take this cell at all, we get shaded cells out here and a maximum of 3. And so this cell is shaded, and the maximum value for H, and in fact the value for H, must be 4. Okay, so the next bit of progress comes from the cave puzzle down in puzzle E, because we don't have any more easy progress in D because we haven't yet placed the 2. Once we can place the 2 into the Nurikabe puzzle, this will get a lot easier to work with. But let's look specifically at these S's again. If we consider that it must be 5 or 6, can this S ever be 6? Well, case 1, consider if this cell is shaded, this A must be 6 or greater. Okay, so we've proven this cell is unshaded. Now let's try and we can do the same deduction on this cell to prove it's unshaded. And now, consider this cell. Can it be shaded? Well, if we shade it, this happens, and one of the S's dies. So, okay, you say, we know that this cell is unshaded. This is how the 6 shakes out. But then, we get the exact same problem on the other side. And so as a result of that, we know that S equals 5. And you'll notice that the S must grab at least one cell in each of the other directions. And as a result of that, you can get here through standard cave logic pretty quickly. That also gives S equals 6 to the Corrado puzzle. And from that, we can make a statement about our Corrado puzzle. Again, switching thinking a little bit. If we look at both of these two cells right here, I can tell you that they both must be shaded. This one is perhaps the most obvious. The largest possible value for P would be 4 right now. And if we assume this cell is unshaded, then this P would have a value of 6 or higher from satisfying this 6. Similarly, this cell must be shaded because otherwise this S has a value of 6 going over here, and it must connect to at least one other number, but it could still be 5 via W equals 5. So this cell must be shaded. However, we know that both P and W cannot be 5, which means that this value for P could be 4, but we need at least 2 in this clump. And similarly, if we try and take a third in this clump, we can do that because W is 2 or 3 via our Latin square here, but it cannot take a fourth, which means that this must extend out to at least here so that P is equal to 3 or 4. But P is equal to 4. And in fact, this clump, we still don't know which way it goes, but we can tell you that in the Corrado, P is equal to 4. Do not yet know if W is 3 or if it still manages to be 2 yet, but the fact that we know that the Corrado has a value of 4 for P is a little bit nice. Okay, so let's switch gears just a little bit again and look at this Latin square. We haven't done very much with it, but we can actually make a statement about, in the cave, h must be 3 because it's the only value left there. We can solve the rest of the Corrado now through, again, Latin square logic. Just place the rest of the row. Because at this point, we place this 5, we can place this 2, and w does turn out to be 3. So there's a little bit more trickery here. We're not quite sure how this is going to work. But we can say that from this h, is there anything else we can do with the Latin square right now? There is. We can place this 5, and we can place this 4. And so at this point, we still have a 2-6 pair, basically, in both of those spots, in Narakabe and Cave, and we're not quite sure which way this is going to resolve yet. We'll take a look at that after we solve the rest of the Corrado. So if we look at this h, we know it's 5, and so if we consider this cell, it must be shaded. If it were to be unshaded, then this would be a clump of 4, so it just must be. A in our Corrado has a value of 2, so this cell, this cell is unshaded. If we look at this W, this cell must be shaded, and in fact, because W equals 3, another cell down here touching this S must be shaded, because we cannot take 3 cells above here. We could still take 3 overall, so we don't know how large this clump is, but we do know that it must be of size 3 or greater, because the largest this could be is 3, which means this cell must not be shaded. So now this A is getting mighty constrained. It's quite hard to see what you can do with that, though. So let's try and consider this W. The only way that this does not link up, and in fact, actually, let's look at this P instead. That's even better. This P must have a value of 4. If we shade this cell, it has a value of 4 in one clump, and if we don't, it shades down here to expand the clump and get to 4. Either way, this clump is of 4, so this one is of 2. This one must then be of size 3, which cannot extend here. Extends that down a little bit. We know this one's a size 3 as well, so it's not too useful. Now, if we look at this A, we know it's of size 2. It can't touch this P without making this P 5. So we can still make a little more progress here. As soon as we shade here for the H, we need 2 more in there. It's hard to say what to do with this. We know that this H has a value of 5. This is of size 4. So this is of size 1. And I think the next step in the Corrado has to do with this W, as this W is also of size 3. But I'm not quite sure what it would be. Might be over here too. And in fact, this S has a similar deduction to the one we used with this S, where it must go in both directions. Where this one must go in both directions, as this one's largest size is 1. And then no matter what we do with this clump right here, it cannot reach size 6 in any way without impacting this H or this A or this P. So we must go up here, which feeds back to this. Now this could still be a size 2 clump, except for this A exists. And the reason for that is if we were to shade this cell, we would get this little contradiction on this last leftmost A. So this is a clump of size 1, this is a clump of size 2, this is another clump of size 2 because this one is of size 5. Because H equals 5, we can touch here, we cannot touch the P, and we get to at least here. Again, not touching the P. This is a clump of size 3, which means that if we shade here, then this S is now 4 or 9. Since it must be 6, we can do the following. This is a clump of size 3, this must be 4. The same logic applies in a couple more places here. If we look at this W of size 3, it must go here. We must extend a little farther. We must stop extending. H is now maximal. This A is satisfied. This W has to extend. This H must go here. It must extend over there. And then this W has nothing yet. And so this is the solution to the Corrado puzzle. And so you might be thinking, okay, we just have one more disambiguation to go and then two more simple logic puzzles. How hard could it be? Well, let's find out. Let's look at the Narakabe, because now that we know that A equals 5, this cell must be unshaded. This cell could still be shaded or unshaded, we don't know yet. But regardless of which it is, we must unshade this cell. And at this point, this A has a maximum value of 5, which is what it is. It has 6 cells available to it, and these two are mutually exclusive. So we can make a little bit of deduction about how this must go. This shaded cell must escape through here. We don't yet know if this W extends down. In fact, we don't know what this W is yet. So we can't say too much about it. And now I'm going to posit that this cell cannot be unshaded and must be shaded. And the reason for that is very simple: connectivity. It's a little hard to see that this is where this will go in your head, but if you look ahead a little bit, it is entirely possible to see unshaded, shaded, unshaded, broken. So this P has now extended to be at least size 2, which we know it must, but we don't yet know if P is 2 or 6. And the next thing we're going to do is look at this H. It has a range of 6 possible cells that it can take up. Actually, wait a moment, we can immediately actually state the size of this P if we look at the top of the cave puzzle. That's what just hit me. So because we know that S equals 5, it must reach at least one of these W's. And because we know it must reach a W, it must be at least 4. The only option for that is 6. And so that means that in the cave puzzle, P is 2. In the Narakabe, W is 2. And P is 6. And that allows you to start making some more progress with simple Narakabe logic. So because we know that W is 2, we can get to this, which is exactly what we would have hoped to see. This H is now maximal. There's just no more room for it to do anything. This H is almost maximal. Can't quite say how these shaded cells are going to escape just yet. This S down here, funnily enough, we made a deduction earlier that made this 3 maximal. We're going to be doing the same thing with this one, which gives us the rest of our first 6, which gives us a 2. We know that A in this puzzle is 5. And we're left with this kind of tricky section in this puzzle. As soon as we get to this state, this is a little tricky to prove unique, and it's a little tricky to see as well, but the simplest way to put it is this cell can never be unshaded, because as soon as it is, you don't have room to go around. So it must be shaded, which immediately resolves the remainder of the Narakabe. Okay, moving on. We know the cave, and it's just a matter of solving the cave. 2's in a cave puzzle on a diagonal like this. You cannot shade both of these cells, because then the unshaded cells must connect, and so the shaded cell cannot escape. Therefore, we can actually state quite a lot about how this must go. If we look at H over here, H equals 3, and so we can actually state that the other shaded cell in this H, or unshaded cell in this H, is one of these two. And shade that cell, which gives us this A. This A has a maximum value of 4, and so does this one, so this cell must be shaded. This P is 2, and so this H is 3, and we can get to a state like this quite quickly. But the cave puzzle has a bit of a bite to it. The next big step with this cave puzzle has to do with how the grid will end up overall connecting between these 5s and 6s. And I know that might seem far-fetched, but let me talk you through it. Actually, let me make sure there's no other easy steps first. This W can do whatever it wants. This W can do whatever it wants. This A can't do very much, but you can't. No, you can say this cell is unshaded. You cannot extend 2 up. H in our cave is 3. This cell must be shaded. So this cave goes this way, connects up here. This 6 could still go all the way down. We don't know if it does or if it doesn't yet. Those among you who are tempted to use uniqueness logic will be saying, but of course it goes all the way down. But if you assume a unique solution and then the puzzle turns out to not have one, your uniqueness deduction could lead you to a state in which there is no solution. So I tend to not use that. I will sometimes use that to guide me for where to look, but I won't use it to actually solve the puzzle unless I'm truly, truly stuck. So if we look at this S, can it go all the way to the side? Or can it go all the way to either side? And remember, this P is 2, and that's interacting with this. So if this S goes all the way down on this diagonally symmetric section, we get this extension, and this P immediately fails via the no checkerboard follow-up of the cave rules. So with that, we know that this must extend in both directions an unshaded cell. And now we know it must connect to one of these. So either, and at this point, it's 4. So this W will then extend 2 this way and tag the P, or this W will do the same thing. Either way, those 3 cells are shaded. And this cell is shaded. And this is where the puzzle really comes into play. Because there's a step here about how the overall puzzle must connect. And it has to do with noticing that the puzzle must connect through this little passageway. You cannot pass through the 2. One of these 2 cells is walled. Likewise, you cannot pass through the S because one of these 2 cells is walled. And the only way to link this half and this half is through here, which will resolve all of this. We still don't know which way this is going to go with the W, except we actually do know, because this S cannot go down to connect to this W without breaking the W. This must link over here. This S is 5, so it's not super helpful. This W must go down, and in fact, it does do what we expected it to do. Simple cave logic. This W is now satisfied. This W is now satisfied. This A is satisfied. This S must go up here. And in fact, this is how the puzzle ends up getting solved. So I hope that this was interesting to you. I hope that even with the intended logic break available via a little more looking ahead in puzzle E for the top of rule out doesn't ruin it for you. I hope this was interesting. I spent a long time making this. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was a lot of fun, and POS enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope that you guys gave this a shot before watching this video, because I forgot to recommend doing that. If you want to try this yourself for some reason after just seeing the solution spelled out for you, I have the blog post where I put it in the description. I haven't done many of these walkthroughs yet, but I'd like to do more. They're a lot of fun. That's about it. Just recorded a 40-minute video. Alright, that's all for now. Later.